Welcome to another episode of the Straight Up Chicago Investor Podcast. I'm Tom Shellcross. With me, as always, is Mark Ainley. Mark, what do you got going on over there?
Well, I wanted to give a special shout out to Korea, the real estate investing group out of Lisle. They meet in Lisle, they meet in Glendale Heights, they meet a couple times a month, but they've been around for a really long time. And they invited me out to give a presentation last night on lease marketing and screening and so forth. So I was honored to partake in their event last night. And you'd be happy to hear, Tom, that when I asked who's listening to podcasts, about 3/4 of the people raised their hand yes, and the other quarter I saw them right away write down the name, hopefully, of it. So good. They're a great group out there. So if you want more information on this group that meets in, call it Southern DuPage County, you could go to straightupchicagoinvestor.com and go under our real estate meetup groups, and you'll be able to see their information along with everyone else's information. If you know any other groups that we're missing on there, please feel free to share them and we'll add them on there.
There we go. Yeah, if you're part of a meetup and you don't see it on our website, let us know. Like, we want to keep adding these to the site. Like, we want all the information out there because there's someone looking in the Western burbs, the Northern burbs, and we probably don't have a site out there for them, but it probably does exist. And we want to make sure that we can make that connection. So if you know of one and it's not on our site, let us know. We'll add it. We'll give them the appropriate publicity. People come and check it out. It's a win-win for everybody.
Yep. Awesome. So as far as our housing provider tip of the week, I'm going to tie it in with kind of our guest today, but this is something that's so obvious, but even experienced investors, they glance over it or they take it, they start getting comfortable with their timelines. But if you're getting permits, if you have to get permits, make sure you're allowing time. Whenever you're getting permits, it'll always take twice as long as you planned on your when you're originally under contract to buy the place. So I know, Tom, you can speak to this, that the time frames, one little thing in your permits, or we've talked about working on some of those things before you close, or getting going the day you close. Like, just make sure you're always allowing for the amount of time that you're going to need. A lot of times, if you're having hard money, you're calculating how much that hard money is going to cost you for that first 3 to 4 months. But there's a good chance your project's going to take 6 to 8 months. So make sure that you have the money to let the project run its course, and make sure that you're allowing for timeframes and seasonality if you're trying to flip something.
Yeah, I would just say, like, there's so many things you can do to be proactive, right? You can get your drawings done beforehand. You can have that as part of the negotiation, so you can submit like as soon as possible. Let's say it's your first job and it's just an easy permit. Well, know the process. So on the day you close, you can go do it. Like, you don't let a week drag. Like, oh, I got to talk to someone, or I have to ask if I should do this. Like, you have so much runway to just get your house in order and just minimize as much as possible. I'd say the other thing too is quantify everything. So you talked about, like, this is my holding cost. Well, if in zoning cost me an additional $1,500, but it knocks off 3 weeks of the timeline, do the math. Like, should I pay for that? Right? Maybe you should, maybe you shouldn't, but quantify so you can figure out the right path for your project.
And even with an easy permit, even though it's called easy permit, there's still little things you have to know about completing that and make sure what you qualify for and what you have to say when you walk in the 9th floor, how you get up to the 9th floor, or who you're sending to, whatever it might be. You still understand the process, even if you are going for the easy permit, repair, replace permit. So yeah,
getting the LOIs, right? You have all that time to get for that. We do that all the time. We forget about the LOI from the contractor. It's like, oh, come on, we lost a day because of this. That's stupid. Like, we had 30 days before we closed where we could have gotten that LOI.
Yep.
Mark, we got a heavy hitter today. This is a good one.
We do. I was excited about this one since I was introduced by Ryan Smith at the summer soiree for the MBOA. So thanks to MBOA for putting that event on, where we are ultimately here today because of that. Yeah, no, absolutely. Great event. Ryan, thanks for the intro as usual. But our guest today served as the Commissioner of Buildings, served as the head of the Commissioner of Buildings for the City of Chicago from 2015 to 2020. For an idea of scale, that's a 300-person department and an annual budget of almost $40 million. She led the reform in 2015 that streamlined the permit process, made Chicago one of the first cities to align with the 2019 International Building Code. If you've ever applied for an alternative code approval request, you might hear an architect say ACAR. That's for your PVC piping and some of the other ones. You owe our guest a drink or maybe more, because that's a huge cost saver for many of our investors here. Numerous awards, just a couple. 2018 Labor Person of the Year from IBEW Local 134, Building Industry Woman of the Year in Construction, just to name a few of them. Currently volunteering in her public service role as the Illinois Medical District Commission. And through her private legal practice, she shares her deep understanding of municipal government and problem solving. Whole lot to talk about today.
Judy Frydland, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm great. And thank you so much for having me. This is great. I love it.
I'm so amped by that introduction. Like that was awesome introduction. Like there's so much we're honored to have you on here. So it's very exciting.
Oh no, this is great. I'm just so happy to chat and talk and exchange information. I love it too.
All right. So I guess before jumping in, you've been out of the role as leading up the building commissions for almost a little over a year now. What do you miss most about it? There's got to be something you look back on, everyone does with a job, and say, man, I really miss X. What is the one thing you wish you still had in your day-to-day life?
Oh, I miss all of it, and a lot of it is the people, the interaction that I was able to have with people that work for government. Government gets a bad rap a lot, but there's a lot of really good people that work in government that work really hard to really try to help people and solve problems. And to be part of a group of people like that was amazing. I liked working with the public. I liked being involved, problem solving, all of it. And, I just loved every minute of my whole time with the city of Chicago. I'm just so fortunate that I was able to start, while I was still in law school and work my way up like that. I never would have imagined in a billion years that my career would have gone this way. And I'm just so grateful for it.
Yep. No, that's great. So let's talk about the career a little bit here. So for our listeners, growing and scaling is a huge focal point. Everyone's looking to grow a portfolio or grow their business. For our listeners who don't know, you got involved with the city while you're still in law school, unpaid intern, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct.
So talk us through, how did you move up the ranks, right? You had so many accomplishments, which we'll get to in a second, but how did you go from unpaid intern to running the department?
Yeah. So I was in law school and, I'm not the most academic of people. I'm more of a doer. I'm more of a practical person, problem solver. And I knew that when I was in law school that all the theory and all that we were learning was great. But if I didn't learn the process of actually how things worked, I wouldn't be as successful. So I wanted to also get school credit for working because I worked full time when I went to law school. So I've never been afraid of work. I always worked 2 jobs ever since I was 16 years old, or 15 actually. And so I was eager to expand and do more. So we had a counselor, Professor Vivian Gross, and I went to see her and I said, I want to do an unpaid externship for class credit. So she went through a list. She said the CTA, I said no. CHA, she said no. I said no. And then she said, well, we have the city of Chicago here and they do housing court in the law department. Would you like to do that? And I said, yes, that's what I want. And to this day, I couldn't tell you why I picked it. I don't know. I naturally did well in my property classes in law school. I think it kind of came naturally to me and it sounded good. And so I went to the city and I started an unpaid externship. And then they offered me a job as a paid intern, I should say. I think I made at the time, I don't even know what they were paying. Maybe it was $7 an hour, something crazy. But I was a student and a law student. I had a full-time job. And so I worked 5 days a week at my other job. And then I worked 2 days a week at the City of Chicago Law Department, where I got paid my $7 an hour. And so there I think I started in demolition court. Then I went over to help in another courtroom where we had a lot of downtown buildings and we had some of the West Side. And then I also started doing working in court for lead paint violations, housing that had lead paint. And so I was a 7-Eleven law clerk, which meant that I was able to prosecute cases while I was still in law school and get up in front of the bench. And I was really fortunate because the first judge that I practiced a lot in front of is Paul Preston. He's passed away many years ago, but he kind of looked like Grandpa from the Munsters. He would sit up behind the bench and he taught me so much of what I do to this day. And the big thing that he taught me was to really listen and to let people talk, So we would have a lot of defendants building owners, small building owners, often very small, not the slumlords that you often think of, but sometimes we had them, but, and they would come in and he would always give a speech about how we're here to preserve buildings. And he gave a big opening speech, and then he let people speak, and he really listened to them. And sometimes they would go on and basically admit their violations, and he'd say, by your own admission, and then he'd order them to fix it. But he was very beloved. If he was on the bus or out on the street, he would see defendants, building owners, they'd come up to him. Hi, Judge, how are you? They just loved that he took the time and really listened. And that was a huge, huge lesson that I learned from him. And he was kind, and he listened, and he was practical. And so that was a great experience for me as a law student. And I also had a couple mentors in the law department too, that taught me how to listen and to solve problems and to work things out. So then eventually, after I finished law school, I was hired, as an attorney in housing court. And so I continued on, and I worked. As I started, after I was a lawyer, I got married, and I was still continuing to prosecute in housing court, doing my job. And then I had my first child, and I really wanted to get out of work on time and get home, to my daughter. And so I said, I'm going to be the best employee that I can be. Whatever my boss asks me to do, I'm going to do it first, right? Because I don't want to get stuck after work. I don't want to have issues. I want to be able to leave on time. And if I do everything really well, no one's going to give me a hard time. And it worked. It was great. I did all my work. I worked through lunch. Whatever people asked me to do, I did. And so, that combination. And so I just continued to work while I started my family. After my second daughter was born, I got promoted to be a senior counsel to supervise some of the other attorneys. And I was leery about doing that because I had two small children at home. But, my boss said, it'll empower you more because you'll have more people to help you. You could supervise. It's going to work out. Trust me, it'll work out. So my boss did that, and I thought that was great. And so I did that for many years. And over time, I just really just tried to help everybody that asked me for help, right? So if somebody, didn't have heat, I really worked hard to make sure they had heat. Or if there was a really dangerous vacant building next door to them and they were afraid, we would work towards getting that house down. If there was a bad landlord, that wouldn't fix something, a lot of times fines don't work because they just go into this like Netherland. I don't know where they go, where somebody out there tries to enforce it. So one of the things I figured out how to do, and I did this with Judge Preston, I learned early, was to make people come back to court every single day until it was complied, because nobody wants to come back to the Daily Center every single day. And if they miss a court date, you can ask the judge to issue a warrant for their arrest. So they have to come, right? And so I tried to be more and more creative with my solutions. Also sometime in the 90s, we had a terrible situation of a woman and her two daughters that died of carbon monoxide poisoning from a faulty heating system. And, with that, I thought, well, what are we going to do here? Because any fine, what's that going to help? And there was no insurance. And so we worked out an agreement for the owner to sell all his properties and settle up with the family. So I tried to find solutions that were more creative and that help people, because fines have a place, but they don't solve everything. You really have to really think creatively and outside the box. So anyway, time went on. And, I worked for the housing division, but we were also in our division, we also had zoning, we had demolition, we had the drug and gang house unit, we had licensing and so forth. And so the deputy of our department left, and I was made the acting deputy for a while. And then right before Mayor Emanuel became mayor under Mayor Daley, I was made the deputy of the division. And I did that for 5 or 6 years. And we did a lot of really great things during that time. We worked really hard on crime buildings and getting those under control, getting vacant properties under control. That was also during the time of, 2008, when we had the housing crash, having to deal with all that. So we came up with a lot of creative solutions for that, worked on the vacant building ordinance, worked on sign ordinances. And so at the beginning of Mayor Emanuel's second term, I was asked to interview for the job of building commissioner. And so then I was appointed in 2015 to become the building commissioner. And, I think the high points of that interview were not only, I talked to, Mayor Emanuel about our families and things that we had in common, but also I think that we understood that for economic development to happen, you have to be very welcoming of economic development. You have to work with developers. You have to move obstacles out of their way, right? And it's also very important, though, not to just help the developers, but you also have to help in the neighborhoods. You have to make sure that buildings are safe, that people have heat, that people have hot water, and that you're willing to enforce and to do what's necessary to keep people safe. That's a huge part of it as well, right? So it's not just development, it's many things. And so we came to a good place on all of that. And he gave me the opportunity to run this department, even though at the time, I think I might have supervised maybe 50 to 60 people. This came out to over almost 300. And he's like, can you do that? I'm like, yeah, sure, I can do it. Absolutely. So
internally, how much were you realistically scared and I'm not ready for this, but still did it anyways, still said yes?
I don't think I was scared. I worked for so many years with the building department. I thought I knew a lot. Of course, I didn't know half what I thought I to just go in there, right? So that was great. But everybody was very warm and welcoming. And I felt pretty good about it. I had pretty good ideas about what needed to happen to move forward. And having worked with so many inspectors over the years, they were my witnesses in court. So I knew a lot of them. And I got some really good advice. And, I don't think that I was afraid. I was maybe a little overwhelmed of learning everything, but I don't feel that I ever was afraid. I also had very good working relationships with many aldermen and alderwomen. I worked with them over the years on many things. They were very welcoming. They were great. I mean, everybody was very supportive. So I didn't feel that I was afraid. What I really did appreciate is almost the first day that I was there, Zurich Esposito, who was the executive director at the time of the AIA, the Institute of Architects, he came in and he said, we want to help you. How can we help you? And so we decided that they would form an advisory committee. And they helped me, this advisory committee. I mean, really, we started with that advisory committee and we got a brand new building code after 70 years at the end of, 4 years. So they were fantastic. We reinstituted the electrical commission that had been on some hiatus for 14 years that was actually mandated by the code. You had to have it. Mm-hmm. And we got a brand new electrical code out of that. And then, we had some safety issue. We had the death of a firefighter who fell through an elevator shaft. And that was very troubling to me because we didn't have a mechanism to deal with bad contractors. We just didn't have one. It was so antiquated and useless. I mean, I guess we had one, if you want to call it that, whatever it was useless. And so it took me and a safety committee that I put together after that about almost a year to figure out a solution, but we did figure it out. And we passed contractors ordinance. I think it was in 2017. I'm not 100% sure, but that was very effective to deal with bad contractors because people get taken advantage of a lot by bad contractors and it's not a good thing and it's not safe. So we did that. So I really like committees and advisories, and I try to meet with people that may have ideas that are totally different than mine that I may not agree with, but you often listen to people long enough. And even if you think you totally disagree with them, you're going to hear something from them that you're going to be like, wow, that's a great idea. And great ideas come from everywhere. They don't have a label on them. They're just a great idea.
You made some huge changes in those 5 years, just from reading up on this, in advance of this. And I know from just growing our business, as we grow, to make the smallest changes, as we get bigger, it gets more and more difficult over the silliest little things, like and get everyone on board. But turning that ship, I imagine you make it sound very easy when you talk about it. And so, but what are like some of their challenges, and how did you kind of overcome those, and like trying to put these changes in place? Because I'm sure no matter what, you had some people that put up resistance in the things you wanted to do.
Yeah.
Before you answer, Judy, one thing I want to just add to that question is, was everyone aligned at the building department of, hey, we need to make the permit process easier, right? Like if investors, we love it. It's great. But like, was there resistance? Be like, no, this is the way we've always done it. Or was everyone already bought into the vision and you just needed someone to go execute it?
No, those are all really great questions. And so I made a big cultural change too when I was at the law department, bringing people to work in together from the different units a lot more than they were used to, right? And so I think that when you go into an organization, or we have an organization and you really want it to grow, the first thing you have to do is, of course, make sure that everybody's on the same page as you, right? Because otherwise people are working against you or they have different ideas. And so, you have to meet with your team, and I had a great team. Plus, I hired a couple people that I had worked with at the law department. I brought in some of my own team as well. And so everybody philosophically has to be on the same page as part of your executive team, right? So you have to have the same vision, because they can't come to you with every single little tiny itty bitty problem, right? So you have to trust them, and they have to have the confidence that you will back them up. Right? Because if they don't have the confidence that you will back them up, they'll be afraid to make those decisions that you need to be made. So as long as people are in the right headspace to make the decision. In other words, when you work for government, they're not taking money or they're not unduly influenced. They're really based on the facts in front of them, making the best decision possible. You have to back them up. You also all have to have the same vision that we're here for customer service, that we're here to help people, that if somebody is in dire straits that doesn't have heat or something, that is a priority, that safety has to be first, and everybody has to feel that. I think the other thing is one of the first things I did as well was I met with a lot of the employees. I went to the employees, right? And, inspectors have do have a reputation of giving business owners or people an unduly hard time, right, for their inspections. And, I explained to them, I said, look, every business that opens, every building that gets built is tax dollars into our tax coffers. And that's what pays for your pension. That people understand. Pensions are important, and money to pay for city services. I said, we don't get that money from permit fees, right? We don't get it from inspection fees. Those are so nominal, they don't even cover really the cost of what we do. I said, so you're a partner, and if a business needs a little direction or help, they don't know what to do, give it to them. You want to get them open. Right. And the other thing that used to happen when I started that I stopped was that a business would be ready to open, but they might have a couple minor things that weren't dangerous at all, just a couple minor things open, and they wouldn't be able to get their business license or certificate of occupancy or whatever they needed to open or get occupied. I said, well, we're going to stop that. So they can do an agreement that they'll have it done in 30 or 60 days and they could start. So when you start to multiply that by sales tax and real estate tax, business after business, those months add up. You could close a budget hole, right, with some of that money. So we started to do those kind of things, and they liked it and they understood it, right? And, I said, of course, safety first. And if something's dangerous, you have to deal with it. But we also have to work with people. And then on the permitting side, I met with a lot of the people that process permits. And I said, well, what drives you crazy about the permit process, right? Well, and they said, well, people don't complete their applications correctly. We have to send it back. They don't do this. And I said, well, is the application clear? Are we asking the things that we need to ask? So we went back over the application. I took their suggestions. And so we worked together with them. So the people that did the permit review were heard and they got to make their suggestions. At the same time, I was meeting with people on the outside. So it's really, to me, my leadership skills have always come from consensus. Right? You have to hear from everybody. Everybody has to give you their input, and you have to listen and you have to evaluate everybody and everything. And then you make a decision, and you can't be afraid of making a decision. You have to be able to make the decision, but it's a decision. And I used to tell my people, don't be afraid of disagreeing with me. Don't be afraid of telling me that I'm wrong. You have to tell me everything that I have to consider in a decision, because I'm not going to be mad if I disagree with you, but I'll be mad if I make a decision and it didn't turn out so great and I find out, oh, so-and-so was scared to tell me, oh yeah, that might happen. Then I'll be mad. Just tell me. Just tell me. I'm not going to bite your head off. I might pout a couple minutes if you tell me I can't do something or it's not the way I want it done. I'll pout for a few minutes and I'll sit in the corner and then I'll come back and I'll be okay. But I'm not going to bite your head off and I'm not going to be mad at you or anything. And that's how you have to move forward. You really can't have an ego. It's not about you. It's about the people involved and the solution that works. And I know it sounds cheesy, but it's really about making people's lives better and easier. People don't have an easy time in life. Everyone struggles. My mother used to tell me life is hard even when it's good. And if you can make it easier, if you can solve a problem, if you can help somebody, you're going to feel better. You will feel better about yourself, and you will feel that you've accomplished something. And then it'll feed on itself, right? It'll just grow and grow. And so I think that that's kind of my leadership style and how I was able to bring all these different groups together.
So that's awesome. So it's a couple things to pull out here. So just the simplicity of you have to work with people. And even earlier you said, fines have a place, but you get to a solution, right? Mm-hmm. Like just in any business situation, like that's so true. Like from the real estate side, so many times we're in a transaction and you have two agents who are like, well, this is what the inspection report says. And we're bickering over whatever. It's like, you have someone who wants to buy a house. You have someone who wants to sell a house. Let's figure this out. Right. Mm-hmm. We're human beings. We all want something. Let's get past the red tape. Let's get to the answer, guys. Like, get out of your little box of this is the way things are done. Like it's so simple, yet it's so underutilized, I feel, in just any sort of transaction. Mm-hmm. Judy, what would you say would be like the hardest part? So it sounds like, obviously a lot of change. When you mentioned cultural change, because there's a lot of people who are starting their own businesses or just even looking to revamp themselves of I'm a W-2 employee and now, I'm going to be a real estate investor. That cultural change, that branding change, what would be like the hardest obstacle that you overcame when you were transforming the culture within the city there, or within the department, I should say?
I think maybe people's initial hesitancy when you go to them, when you say, let's talk together, let's work together. People are kind of like, is she real? Is she not real? Mm-hmm. What's her angle? And I think it's bringing people to a place where they're comfortable that there is no angle, that it's just a matter of having people work more closely together to get a better result, right? And I think that that's important. Just making people feel comfortable with you and your ideas. And sometimes you have to talk to people one-on-one. Sometimes you can talk to people in a group. If you see that there's somebody that's hesitant, talk to them. And just understand that sometimes there are people that are just going to be who they are and they might not jump in or along, but you kind of work around it. You kind of work with what you have. And then sometimes people join in later and, sometimes they don't, but you just have to keep moving forward.
Yeah. People are afraid of change and people are skeptical up front. And it sounds like a great leadership quality that you have of getting people to come around on both those fronts right away. You had to, sounds like. So.
Right. And I also think you have to lead by example, right? So if they see you losing your temper or yelling at somebody, they're going to say, well, see, she doesn't do it. So I can lose my temper and yell at somebody or not help them. But if they see that you do it and, and that it's not automatically that easy all the time. You have to control yourself sometimes. There's a thing that people should think about, controlling yourself. You control yourself and you work it through and you lead by example and you show them that you're willing to do it. You're willing to be patient and helpful and get through the difficult bumps. And then they say, well, okay, practice what you preach.
Yep. I had a moment today in the office where it's like, all right, don't let anyone see what you're thinking right now. I had to be pretty slick about that, but all right, cool. So what were some, all the time you spent in just in Chicago here, like what are some of the unique nuances with Chicago buildings kind of compared to other cities that you think there is?
Well, we had our own Chicago building code that was very strict, right? We've had fires, we've had a lot of tragedies in the city. And so our code reflected that. We weren't in line with the international codes in many areas, though we had tried over the years to do some, we weren't. And so when people would come and build in Chicago, they'd have to study our code, and it wasn't even in the same place, like different requirements and so it made it harder for people globally to invest because it was harder for them to figure out what we needed, what it would cost based on our code and so forth. So by making our code more in alignment, while still keeping, some of the things that we need here in Chicago for our density, but at least it's laid out the same. And in global investors or people from the outside can feel more comfortable coming here to build and invest. I think that was important. Yeah. And the other thing I wanted to bring up is the rehab code, is rehabilitation of existing buildings, right? So, I spent a lot of years in housing court dealing with buildings that needed to be rehabilitated, that were dangerous, often had to be vacated. We had a lot of vacant buildings. And it was really expensive to rehab these buildings because the way that our code used to be is once you spent a certain amount of money or did something, then you would automatically trigger the new construction code, which asks for all kinds of things. And there's no way that these buildings could comply. And so people would just throw their hands up in the air and walk away. So in the beginning of my tenure, I had met with the Urban Land Institute and others, and they were saying, we have to figure out a way to save these buildings. So at first I thought we could just work on the rehab code or do a few things like that. But I came to realize that we really needed the overhaul. And so now we have a rehab code that factors in, the type of building it is and what's there, and then makes it better so that it can be utilized again. And so that's very important for the preservation of existing buildings, which is really the most sustainable way to go forward anyway, right? You don't want to demolish and rebuild if you can rehab.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So that was another big one.
One I do want to hit on, because many of our listeners probably are not aware of it, is just the whole ACAR process. When I say ACAR, it's the acronym for Alternative Code Approval Request. Mm-hmm. Can you just give the 101 for someone who is unaware? What is this opportunity? Why would it be beneficial to someone who's an investor? Because I think this is like a big money saver for people who are doing rehabs in the city.
Right. It's a very good system. I forget what it used to be called when I came in. It had a different name. But anyway, what it is say, for example, if you're building new construction or rehabbing a building and you want to do something that could save you money, or is just, maybe in a rehab, it's just not feasible to do what the code says or whatever, and you have a good faith basis and it's equally as safe, then what you can do is you fill out this application, you pay a fee. I think it's $150. I'm not sure how much it is anymore, but you pay a fee and it gets reviewed by our team of experts to review it to see if it does in fact meet the spirit of the code and has a purpose and has a basis to do it. And then they will sign it and then you're allowed to do it. So it's worked out really, really well. Now, it was especially useful before we did the code update, because a lot of people wanted to comply with the international code, but our code didn't match it. And say, for example, if you're building a Hyatt or Hilton, they like to build the same way, right? Their buildings are going to be built the same way. And they come into Chicago with this different code. And they're like, well, we can't do this. We're used to doing it this way. So then they could do an ACAR and they could build it. So now with the new code, it should be less and less necessary, because all these things, or many of these things, should be built into the new code. So.
Yep. No,
but
great.
It's still a good thing to know about.
Yeah, I think the biggest one would be the PVC piping. Like that's the biggest one that we use on a continuous basis, and it's probably a couple grand every job. Like it's
right. Well, the great news is they just passed the ordinance. It's not a pilot program anymore. So now it's the code. You don't have to pay $150. You don't have to wait for the review. I don't know exactly the
you have to go pick it up.
But it kicks in, but it should be pretty soon, and that's huge.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Mm-hmm. So Judy, talk to us a little bit now. What are you up to today? So you left your position. You're still involved. Like what's going on in your life right now? What are you spending your time on in the professional world?
Yeah. So right now I'm, spending my time helping a couple of different corporations with different matters that they have, whether it's building related, organizational, because, I think what I learned, like we talked about earlier about organizations, I learned a lot about hiring, a lot about issues about how to manage employees, how to keep them happy. So I can help, with a variety of issues in organizations. One of my clients is the International Code Council, where I'm working with them on issues in Florida, not here, just be clear, not here, but in Florida, because after, that horrible, tragic, awful collapse of that Champlain South tower, they started auditing Florida's building codes. And there are issues there with the maintenance of existing buildings. And I went down to Florida and I participated in a panel August 17th to discuss inspection protocols and how to go forward. And I talked a lot about the Chicago exterior wall ordinance, how we do it here. And I think that there's a lot to be taken from our exterior wall ordinance and how it works and our enforcement of it, because you can have all the codes in the world, but if you don't enforce them, that's not going to help you. So I'm looking at, as they develop these codes, I'll be looking at the enforcement parts of it, as to how the different municipalities can follow up on the reports, how they can enforce, how they can make sure that people are doing what they're supposed to do without being too onerous, right? You always have to strike that balance. So that's kind of an interesting project that I'm working on. And then I've been doing some work, suburban work, helping people with permits in the suburbs and certificates of occupancy, inspections, so forth. So it's interesting to learn how the suburbs operate.
Nice. Well, now that you're, viewing this whole process from the public side, the private side, what enhancements do you want to see kind of come down when it comes to building departments, whether it be suburbs or the city? Like, what do you see that could be better for everybody? Win-win type stuff.
Well, I think that part of the reason that we had good success at the building department when I was there is I tried to treat it like it was more of a private enterprise, right? So I looked at the people that were using our department as customers and that we had to keep our customers happy. And I also thought of the people that called that said they didn't have heat or hot water or a dangerous building. They're also our customer. I have to make sure that they're happy too, that they're taken care of. So people have to be taken care of, and you have to treat people like a client. And I think that as we seek to have more affordable housing, and when I say affordable housing, I think right now I'm talking the realm of good quality, reasonable rents, right? So good quality apartments with reasonable rents and that people can afford. So you have a job, you can afford $1,200 a month. You can't afford $2,500, right? You can afford $900, you can afford $800. Where are we in that area of that $800 to $1,200 area there for rental? So how do we get that? And part of it is keeping the cost of construction down, right? Which we try to do with the building code. But also, we have to be open to ideas of reducing the cost of construction further, of saving people time. Time is money. I think you talked about that right at the beginning. You said, well, do I pay the $1,500 for the zoning review? Will it save me 3 weeks? Because time is money. So I think that municipalities, when somebody wants to come and spend money in your city, you should say, come in, have a seat. Let's talk about it. How can I help you? How can I support you? What can we do to make the process easier for you? Here's, I used to give people, my email address, my number, and said, look, if you hit a hiccup along the way, call me, because sometimes there's misunderstandings in the way things go forward. So if there's a misunderstanding or you don't understand something or you're told you need to do something, call me. So we have to have that concierge service for people to be able to come and want to build at a price point that works, because it's all about the price point, right?
Mm-hmm. So going back to that, Judy, we mentioned affordable housing. What are your thoughts on the ADU program? Like, do you see that being the pilot that's out right now, being a good way to combat affordable housing, or do you feel like there's a lot more on the table that we need to do?
Well, I think that the new law that Governor Pritzker just signed, giving people that provide these units at a reduced rent get a tax break, is huge, right? Because before that, you got nothing, right? You're just told, do it. And now you get a tax break for it. And you get a tax break if you take one of these older buildings and you rehab it and you rent it, affordably. So all that is really great. My only issue that I ever really had with the AROs is that I felt like there should be more ability to, I think you have like a 1 to 3 mile radius that you have to provide the unit in. And I think that the unfortunate or unintended consequence of that is maybe that our neighborhoods don't get the investment that they need. And so I think that if you said, you're going to build, you're going to get all these extra units, but instead of building, 5 affordable units in the building that you're in, go into a neighborhood that's blighted or really struggling and rehab or build 10 single family homes, right? So I think that the homes in our neighborhoods need to either be rehabbed, or we could build some new ones and find ways. And I had people come in with great ideas to build new homes at price points at about $200,000 to $250,000. And with today's mortgage rates, it's very affordable, right? You get a new home and the taxes, and you get a tax deduction. And so I really feel, and I've always felt, that our neighborhoods really, really need a lot of attention. And, you could do eminent domain over areas, 6-8 block areas, and find a developer to rehab them or to do something with them, especially now where a lot of people want to, buy and rent single family homes, because people don't always want to buy. To buy, and they'd rather rent. And so there's things that you can do like that. You can build communities where you have security. There's so many ideas. We could go on with, lots of ideas that I've had over the years about building up affordable housing. Another thing is all our vacant storefronts. There should be a pilot somewhere along the line where you could go in for a certain percentage of these vacant storefronts and come up with a design to make them secure, and they're naturally handicap accessible, because you can go in on the ground floor, you can build an easier ramp. There are things that I feel like different committees could sit down and iron out and come up with some really great ideas to create more naturally affordable housing that people can afford and feel safe in, and is attractive, and makes them feel part of the community, some skin in the game. So I think there's a lot of room for discussion there.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's anytime we see some of these incentives, just from an investing standpoint too, it's great to see, all right, the city or one of these associations like CNI, like in their work in Pullman, like they're investing here, like they're trying to make this thing work. It's usually a good indicator, like, okay, like let's take a shot here. Right. Mm-hmm. Like, at least in my eyes, it's, if the city's saying yes here, I don't say they're not going to let it fail, but you have the backing. Like you're in you have some, usually we're so used to headwinds, we actually have some backwinds there.
Right. And you really need public-private partnerships. Like, the government can't do it on its own, and the private sector has a hard time doing some of this on its own at the price point that we need. And so we just have to really continue to work really, really hard together to find solutions. And Pullman's a perfect example of that. We had CNI, and then they came in with a private partner that had some capital, and boom, it's awesome.
Yeah. They got a Culver's there now. I just saw that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, they and they have an alderman there that works really hard on, economic development there. Alderman Beals worked really, really hard. That stuff doesn't just pop up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I guess what we're looking here, we're in the private side now, but where do you see both any other changes happening in the city? You said you had, some ideas, like 5 years from now. What are your thoughts on, do you see storefronts actually becoming, code change? Like, do you see any drastic changes coming from the building department over the next, call it 3 to 5 years?
That's kind of hard to say. I think it'll depend on the leadership and what their priorities are. I know that the whole issue of property taxes is a big issue for people that own property in the city. And I think some of it is the uncertainty. A lot of people are appealing and we're trying to find out that sweet spot, right? Because of all the changes. I think that kind of needs to sort itself out so people can understand what their tax liability is going to be. And I think that, we also have the issue of public safety, and people need to feel safe, on the streets. And we need to see that we have a building department and a planning department that is open and flexible and willing to work with the private sector. And those are all the important things that people need to watch going forward, and be open-minded with fresh and new ideas. I mean, that's what we really need, is constant influx of fresh and new ideas, because no matter how things may be going, they can always be better. We can always find better ways of doing it. We can never rest on our laurels. And so it depends on the leadership that we see in the next few years.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's all about leadership when it comes to that stuff, and turning that ship. So, all right, Tom, you ready? Should we wrap?
Let's wrap.
All right. So we're gonna ask a series of questions that we ask everybody. I'm gonna change up this first one a little bit. So I'll make it a little personal, actually. So you've had an amazing career already. You've had a very successful. I hate to use the word client, but you've really made it to high places, and many others wish they could, right? What's it about what's one attribute that you would say that has helped you really make that journey as successful as it's been?
I think that it's been my willingness to help people. You know, you help a lot of people, and sometimes people appreciate it and they don't forget it. And then when there's an opportunity to move up, they'll find you. You know, that you never know who you're talking to. You never know who that person is. And be nice to everybody, be kind to everybody. And the other thing is, you never know who's going to be your next boss. So don't. I learned that a long time ago. Be shocked at who might be your next boss. So just be nice to everybody, be kind, and really, really try to help people, and be competent. Like, do your homework. Know what you're doing. Think it through. Give things the time to think about a solution, and have a competent solution that balances a lot of different things. Because in the end, you know, I never walked a precinct in my life. I never worked for a candidate. I'm not like somebody who knew somebody who brought somebody, whatever that old, Chicago adage is. I just worked, and I did my best. And I tried to be competent and to listen and to be kind. And, at the end of the day, people need competent people to get things done. And so always my suggestion to people starting or working in their careers is do a really good job. And do it not because you think you're going to get something out of it. Do it for your own pride. And another thing that I do at the end of the day is, as the day winds down and I'm trying to fall asleep or so, I go through my day and I think, did I do everything the best that I could today? What could I have done better? Where could I have improved? Where could I have handled that situation better? Did I learn something today? Challenge yourself to be the best that you can be. And I tell my daughters and a lot of young people, don't look to the left and don't look to the right. Don't look to what other people are doing, because there'll always be somebody better than you or doing greater than you. And you're like, oh my God, my life's a train wreck. Look at what these people are doing. It's not that. It's the only person that you can compete with is yourself. And have I done the best I can today, and learn from it so that, the next time a similar situation arises, you do better.
I love it.
Judy, that's great advice. So we're going to piggyback off of that. What is one specific piece of advice you would tell someone that's yet to buy their first property here in Chicago?
Do your homework. Go to the City of Chicago website, put in the address, see if there's any past violations. Some of those violations might have been repaired. It may not be completely up to date, but it'll give you a history of the building. Same if you're going to rent something, look it up, take the time to look it up, have your home inspection, check to see any work that's been done on it previously has had permits, because I can't tell you how many people do work without permits. And then you buy it and all of a sudden somebody pops up and says, well, not somebody, that inspector will pop up and said, hey, where's your permit? So do your homework. Look at the neighborhood. And once you buy a piece of property, if you're not living there, you need to go by that property often. You can't just say, oh, I bought it and go there once a month and collect the rents. You need to be seen. You need to make sure that your property's clean in the front, that your snow is shoveled, that you have a system in place for that. Because when you're not there watching it and somebody slips on the ice, or, your grass isn't cut, you can be sure your neighbors are going to call 311, and then what comes after all that. So be on top of your property, keep it neat, keep it clean, keep it presentable. That's more than half the battle.
Awesome. All right. Here's an easy one. What do you do for fun?
I don't know. I like a lot of Netflix. I have a lot of shows that I like. Netflix, HBO. I mean,
what are you binging right now?
Yeah. What do you binge? Yeah.
Well, I'm on Succession, right?
It's a great show.
It's so good.
Yeah.
And, I'm really enjoying Seinfeld on Netflix right now without the commercials, watching it again after all these years. It's amazing how great it is. I watched this French one, Call My Agent. It was excellent. I mean, there was Shitzel, the one out of Israel about the Orthodox family. I mean, I can go on and on. Mad Men, probably one of my all-time favorites. So I like the series like that because I think they're kind of like reading novels, right? So each episode is a chapter, and you get to learn about other cultures and how other people are living and how other people are thinking. And, I'm an anthropologist at heart. That's kind of what I thought I wanted to be as a kid. I love to see how people live. You go on TikTok, you can see inside people's houses, and you can see how people live. And so that's always fascinated me. And it's all part of, just trying to understand the world around you. And so that helps me relax and takes me out of my headspace into another world a little bit.
Nice. So outside of Netflix, what is a good book, podcast, or self-development activity that you would recommend to our listeners?
I should ask my daughter that question. She's really big on manifesting and podcasting and things like that. So ask me that one more time.
What is a good book, podcast, or self-development activity that you would recommend to our listeners?
Well, I think the self-development activity is the one that I do every day. Is at the end of the day, evaluate your day. Evaluate your day and say, what could I have done better? What did I do well that I would want to do again? And I think it's just constantly challenging yourself to be the best that you can be.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Even if you just get 1% better each day.
Yeah.
Just
all right.
Better.
Besides yourself, name one person in your network that you'd highly recommend to other investors as a quality resource.
Well, tell you, I've really been impressed with the work that I've been seeing Mike Glasser do. He has brought together a group of different neighborhood building owners and brought them together to work together to make sure that their voices is small. Often, many of them are small building owners, but building owners in general, their voices are heard and that they work together. He provides assistance in getting rental assistance for tenants, on dealing with property tax issues. He's able to bring in different political leaders to talk to his group. And I think he's really elevated the discussion for smaller and mid-sized building owners. And I highly recommend that people, reach out to his group or get on their mailing list because it's very helpful, I think.
Absolutely. Mark, we went like 3 episodes without naming Mike Glasser. Now he's back.
Yep, it's back. So,
so Judy, thank you so much. You provided a ton of value to our listeners. How can they learn more about you? Is there any way they can provide value to you?
Well, sure. I have a website, judyfrydland.com, and they can email me there with questions. And you can always still find me on LinkedIn. I'm not a big LinkedIn pro. Okay, so I have no social media. You're not going to find me on Instagram or Facebook or anything like that, except when I was at the building department. The city makes you do those official accounts. I don't have any personal. But just a few weeks ago, I forced myself to do like this LinkedIn account in case somebody wanted to reach me, because I understand that's a big thing in the private sector is LinkedIn. So you can send me a message on LinkedIn. It's Judith Frydland or Judy Frydland. You'll find me. There aren't too many of us. And my website.
We find you on TikTok too, though, I think. So.
Well, no, you won't.
Incognito TikTok. All right.
I have a different name. TikTok.
That's awesome.
All right.
All right. So Mark, I think this one's a doable fact here.
Yeah.
All right. And so, Mark, you get first crack at it, but then Judy, you can also answer. So, when the City of Chicago Council adopted the first building code, it was 5 pages long, and at the time, the Tribune said it was too long, which is funny.
Mhm.
But Mark, what year was that code formulated? And I'll give you four options. But if you think about it for a second, you should be able to get this. Okay. So, is it A, 1875, B, 1888, C, 1901, or D, 1922?
What was A and B real fast again?
1875 and 1888.
1875. Would it be right after fire? Or wait.
You are correct.
All right.
Man. Right. See, I gave you a nice little hint there.
Yeah.
Yay.
That's awesome. 5 pages is too long. Oh my gosh. I can only imagine how many pages that would translate to now. All right. What an awesome show, guys. Judy, thank you very much for joining us. I'm sure there's more we could talk about. So hopefully maybe you'll come back later in the year. Tom, thank you as always. Listeners, please, we talked earlier about the different real estate investment groups. Please check out our website, straightupchicagoinvestor.com. And there's tons of people out there, tons of groups where you can network, get more value, have more conversations, be involved in more conversations on topics like this. So check it out. Again, Judy, thanks, Tom, and we'll see you guys all soon.
Thanks all.
Thank you.